May inaayos pa si Gwen eh. Okay lang. Kailangan mo nga ulit ako. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first installment of our three-part webinar series on promoting good local governance in the Philippines, which is jointly organized by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, or PIDS, and the Department of the Interior and Local Government, or DILG. I'm Sheila Siar of PIDS, and I will be your moderator. Before we start, may we have your attention on our house rules. For all attendees, your microphone is muted upon entry, and this is to prevent any background noise. And to join the open forum, just use the chat box, which is located at the lower part of the screen. Just type your name, your affiliation, and your question. And please make your questions concise because we have limited time. I will read your question during the open forum. And for those of you who are watching us on Facebook, you are also highly encouraged to participate in our open forum. Just use the comment section of Facebook. In addition, when sending your question, for those of you who are using WebEx, please send it to all participants. I repeat, to all participants and not to a particular person. Okay. With that, we can begin our webinar. Again, welcome everyone to our webinar for this week, which we are conducting in partnership with the DILG. And for this webinar, we pose the question, how can we improve local development planning and budgeting? And to answer this question, we will look at the findings of two PIDS studies, which examine the fiscal and governance gaps among Philippine municipalities and also their current planning and budgeting framework. And to formally open our event and share her insights about the topic, may I call on the president of the PIDS, Dr. Celia Reyes.
Thank you, Sheila. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we start, allow me to acknowledge some of our distinguished participants. We're very pleased to have with us this afternoon some of our local chief executives. Let me just acknowledge some of them. Mayor Mercedes Teves Goni from Bais Negros Oriental, Mayor Jesus Florencio Vargas from Abulog, Cagayan, Mayor Milagros Faderanga and Vice Mayor Fegalan from Banton, Romblon, Mayor Nathaniel Escobar from Burgos, Ilocos Sur, Mayor Virginia Perandos from Carmen, Davao del Norte. We have Mayor Dean Villa from Larena, Siquijor, Vice Mayor Vincent Navarroza from Libacao, Aklan, Mayor Roberto Uy from Liloy, Zamboanga del Norte, Mayor Rolly Volante and Vice Mayor Rolando Volante from Malilipot, Albay, Mayor Cesar Robles from Panganiban, Catanduanes, Mayor Acela Sacramed from Sanchez Mira, Cagayan, Mayor Eufemio Oliva from Gandara, Samar, and we also have our colleagues from government. We're very pleased that we have Director Maria Josefina Faulan from the Office of Senator Francis Tolentino, our friends from the ILG, of course, Director Odilon Pasaraba from Bureau of Local Government Supervision, Director John Aris Macaspa from Local Government and Regional Coordination Bureau, Provincial Director John Cerezo from Calabarzon, and Director Sarah Jane Cerezo from the ILG also, and the Executive Director of Local Government Academy, Executive Director Thelma Vecina, and also Provincial Director from Davao de Oro, Director Noel Duarte. Colleagues from the OF, from the Bureau of Local Government Finance, Director Pamela Quizon, as well as Deputy Director Jose Arnold Tan, and also the regional directors. We're very pleased that they're joining us this afternoon, and also the Secretary and Lead Convener of the National Anti-Poverty Commission, Attorney Noel Felonco, and CHED Commissioner Alex Brillantes, Director Milagros Rimando from NEDA, and colleagues from DTI, NIA, UST, and also from the academe and they're representing universities not just here in Metro Manila but all over the country. And also special thanks to our Board of Trustees member, Dr. Gilbert Llanto and Attorney Rafael Lotilla for participating in this afternoon's webinar. Let me also welcome our other friends, civil society, media, private sector, as well as viewers from our Facebook page. We welcome you all to our weekly webinar. This is by far the largest audience we've ever had since we started our webinar in mid-May. And we would like to thank the Department of the Interior and Local Government, especially Undersecretary Maribel Sacendoncillo, Director Annalisa Bonagua of the Bureau of Local Government Development and her team, Mr. Richard Villacorte and his group, and the DILG Public Affairs and Communication Service for helping us in promoting this virtual event, which is, by the way, as mentioned by Sheila, the first of the three-part webinar series organized by PIDS in collaboration with DILG. I was informed that the registration for both July 30 and August 13 webinars are already closed. That means we've reached 1,000 registered participants. Our platform can only accommodate that many, but for those who are not able to register, they can watch the live stream through the PIDS and the DILG Facebook pages. From the PIDS end, I'd like to thank our webinar team led by Director Sheila Siar for organizing these weekly webinars to disseminate PIDS studies. This afternoon, PIDS Research Fellow Dr. Justine Sicat will be presenting two related studies, namely baseline study on policy and governance gaps for the Local Government Support Fund, assistance to municipalities, and assessment of the Philippine Local Government Planning and Budgeting Framework. These studies are part of the outputs of the joint PIDS-DILG project spearheaded by Mr. Villacorte of DILG and Ms. Sicat and Dr. Sicat of PIDS. Just a bit of an information, the LGSF-AM program provides financial subsidy to municipalities for the implementation of their priority programs and projects such as, but not limited to, evacuation centers and disaster risk reduction related equipment, local access roads and bridges, potable water systems, drug rehabilitation centers, and sanitation and health facilities, among others. The first paper identified policy and governance gaps, particularly in infrastructure and planning, to provide baseline data on key issues, on key areas and current planning practices of municipalities. Specifically, it established baseline information on fiscal gaps in local roads, evacuation centers, and rural health units. It also documented governance gaps in development planning through a survey of planning practices vis-a-vis the DILG prescribed processes for municipal governments. The second study, on the other hand, examined the mechanism of development for local governments, as well as mapped out their current planning and budgeting frameworks. The objective of the study is to identify areas of improvement in the planning and budgeting framework of municipal governments in the country. To be able to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the system, the study looked into the mandates, issuances, and current reforms pertaining to the planning and budgeting processes of local governments. This topic is even more relevant and meaningful at this time, considering that the Mandanas ruling supports the increase of LGU's internal revenue allotment rates. Based on the Supreme Court's decision, the source of LGU's IRA should come from all national taxes and not just from internal revenue taxes, which is the current practice in the country. This means additional budget for local governments to finance their programs and projects. It's therefore important to align local budget to development plans in order to optimize the utilization of resources in the local level. To help us gain more insights about the topic to be presented this afternoon, we've also invited Dr. Paul Hutchcroft, Professor of Political and Social Change at the Australian National University, and Mayor Cynthia Falcotelo-Fortes, Barcelona, Sorsogon, Secretary General of the League of Municipalities of the Philippines, as discussants. So I hope you will all stay with us until the end of the webinar and actively participate during the open forum. With this, I now give back the floor to Sheila. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Sel. Our presenter, Dr. Diokno-Sicat, is an assistant professor at the Verata School of Business, University of the Philippines. She is currently on secondment as a research fellow at the PIDS. Dr. Sicat has a PhD in business administration. She is also a PhD economics candidate, has 2 master's degrees on one in management and the other in economics, all from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Her academic and professional experience is focused on the various aspects of the public sector and policy. Here now is Dr. Diokno-Sicat for her presentation. Justine? Hello, Justine?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Reyes and Sheila, for the kind invitation. Here I am. I'm sharing my presentation. Can you see it already on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to this presentation. Today, I will be sharing with you studies on local government planning and budgeting. And here you go there. So this is the outline of my presentation today. There will be 2 studies, as mentioned earlier. First is the baseline study on fiscal and governance gaps in municipalities. And second is an assessment of the Philippine local government planning and budgeting framework. For each of these, I will present the motivation, research questions, and objectives, the scope and methodology, the research results and findings, as well as the recommendations. Now, for the first study, it is the Local Government Support Fund Assistance to Municipalities baseline study on fiscal and governance gaps. And I would like to thank at this point our counterparts at DILG, as Dr. Reyes had thanked earlier, the PIDS management, RSD, RID for organizing this. I'd also like to thank the team, Catherine Adaro, Rixie Madawin, Angel Castillo, Miro Capiri, and Alma Mariano, especially Lucy Melendez for this task. We have been working on this for the past 2 years. And the motivation behind the study is that for decades, the national government has been assisting local governments in the delivery of devolved basic services through targeted programs. So the DILG came to us, we were figuring out how to be able to answer these questions. First, how much do municipalities need to close the gap in key devolved infrastructure areas, such as local roads, rural health units, and evacuation centers? And this wasn't an easy task. This was actually couched in the preparation of the budget for how much would still be needed for the local government fund assistance to municipalities. So what we did here was for the first part of the year, we went to local governments and asked for an inventory of their infrastructure services. And I'll be explaining this in more detail later on. Now, the second question was, do municipalities follow the DILG prescribed development planning guidelines? And here, the sub-questions are, what are current local development planning practices? And how can local development planning be improved? Now, the objectives, as mentioned also earlier by Dr. Reyes, was to establish baseline information for municipalities. First on, the existing fiscal and governance performance indicators. Second, to estimate infrastructure and fiscal gaps for local roads, rural health units, and evacuation centers. And thirdly, to identify governance gaps in local development planning practices. Now, the scope and methodology. So we covered all municipalities. This is basically a census of all municipalities. We interviewed members of the planning team. So here we had the planning officer, we had the engineering officer, we had it's either the budget officer or the accountant, as well as a representative from the CSO. So we use a mixed methods approach. We engaged in analysis and process evaluation using both primary and secondary data. We conducted desk reviews, key informant interviews, and focus group discussions. Now, for the first year that we were doing this, we estimated infrastructure and fiscal gaps based on the data directly collected from municipalities. So we had a bit of a problem finding consolidated data on the inventory of roads, rural health units and evacuation centers for municipalities. So what we did was we sent out templates to our counterparts at the DILG-SLGP office, and they submitted to us their existing infrastructure for those areas based on 2017 data. So that was 2017 data was our baseline information. And the challenge also was in defining the ideal or targets for these key infrastructures. So what we did was we resorted to sectoral policy directions. What do I mean by that? In the case of local roads, we followed what DPWH had prescribed, that one of their targets was to pave all existing roads. So that was our target for local roads. In the case of evacuation centers, we prioritized the presence of a primary evacuation center in geographically isolated and disadvantaged areas, or GIDA areas, of which a municipality can have several. And thirdly, for rural health units, we followed the HFEP of the Department of Health, that there should be at least one per 20,000 population. So I'll be showing you the results of our estimate in a bit. Now, for the second main part of this particular study was the identification of governance gaps. Because a lot of the desk review that we had conducted showed that there were still areas for improvement in local development planning that would ensure that the development projects that were implemented would really benefit the municipality at the soonest possible time. So we got to thinking that we could conduct a census of development planning practices of municipalities. So what we did was we followed the guidelines of the DILG, drafted an instrument in order to be able to examine really how the planning team did this in practice. So what did we find? Well, what we found here, based on our desk review, this is the current fiscal performance of municipalities. So this has been a trend, and it was in 2016 that we had documented this, that municipalities are largely dependent on the intergovernmental fiscal transfer called internal revenue allotment. In 2016, it was documented to be 73%. What this means is that they have relatively low local revenue effort, only at 17%. So the local government income, LGU income, is mostly from transfers from the national government. Now, this is important, especially when you link it with the mandate in the local government code that 20% of what, at least 20% of what is given to local governments must be spent on development projects under the local development fund. And these development projects are the ones that would trigger development and trigger growth in the economy. Now, as of 2016, municipalities spent only 76% of their local development fund, which means that they did not quite satisfy the mandated 20%, at least 20% of spending on development projects. And this has a large impact when it comes to the development of the locality. Now, what are the reasons behind this? Well, the reasons for current fiscal performance of municipalities was documented. We looked here, based on the results of COA audit reports. They identified poor planning, lack of coordination, absence of project monitoring mechanisms as the reason behind either non-implementation or delayed implementation of projects. Our results found, and I will be discussing this in more detail later on, because part of the development planning process is to prepare project briefs for the proposed programs, projects, and activities. And what we found was that only about half of municipalities prepare project briefs for their proposed programs, projects, and activities that are included in local development investment program. Now here I present to you the estimated infrastructure and fiscal gaps. We are answering the question, in 2017, how much did municipalities need to close the gap for roads, evacuation centers, and rural health units? So if you look at the first column here on the left, that's with the background of yellow, this is based on submission of 1,190 municipalities. So this would be understated. And mind you, this is based on 2017 information. The need to pave all existing municipal roads would be about 133 billion pesos to pave 8,331.41 kilometers of unpaved roads. So this is the very minimum. I'm assuming that it would be larger, especially now it's 2020. As for the primary evacuation centers for municipalities with geographically isolated and disadvantaged areas, these are the GIDAs. A municipality, mind you, may have several GIDAs. Based on the 1,159 submissions, we would need between 2 to 12.2 billion pesos to build 488 buildings. Now, I forgot to mention that the standard by which we compute this is our government standard. So the DPWH has a prescribed costing as well as the DILG per kilometer of road. So that's what we applied here. In the case of the primary evacuation centers, it would depend on the kind of evacuation center you need to build, depending on the area, how many families. So that's why we have this range, minimum and then possible maximum, but still not completely for the 1,373 municipalities. Now, for the third estimate, when it comes to the rural health units, and this might change now, especially after what has been going on, the challenge to our health sector. We estimated at the time in 2017 that there was still a need to build 1,638 rural health units. And again, the costing was based on the DOH costing, and it depended on the location of the rural health unit, whether it was in a GIDA or non-GIDA area. So that would range from 17.9 to 21.4 billion. So if you total this all, this would be about 166.9 billion pesos based on 2017 information. Now, having said that, we went on to identifying governance gaps in local development planning. So your patience, please, I know this is a rather cluttered graph, but this captures the entire development planning process of local governments. Local governments are mandated to draft a comprehensive land use plan that is valid for 9 years. From this, they are also mandated to draft multi-year, multi-sectoral development plan, which is valid for 6 years. And it is similar, same time period as the Philippine Development Plan. Now, based on the comprehensive development plan, which is 6 years, each seating local chief executive will draft their own term-based agenda, which is called the executive legislative agenda. And for the benefit of those who are not familiar with the Philippine local government framework, local chief executives have 3-year terms. So that's why they would draft based on the CDP or the 6-year plan, an ELA, what we call an ELA. Now, from this, there are implementation instruments that are drafted. The first of which would be the Local Development Investment Program. So the Local Development Investment Program is a list of prioritized programs, projects, and activities that are identified to be able to close the gap between where the municipality is at the beginning of a term to where it wants to get in its vision and mission. And from this, but the Local Development Investment Program is valid for 3 years. In the Philippines, we have an annual budget, and the planning process is, the planning period is longer. So this Local Development Investment Program must be prioritized, again, into an annual investment program. So you get the most important projects that you want to implement per year, and it should find its way into the annual budget or the appropriation ordinance. So for example, if a newly seated mayor wants to build, let's say, 3 kilometers of roads in the 3-year term, so it could be possible, if that's a priority, that you would divide, okay, I'll build 1 kilometer of road per year, and that would be prioritized in my AIP. So this is the overall local development planning framework. Now, Our study, our survey focused on the drafting of the comprehensive development plan, which is the 6-year plan. And here, as I mentioned earlier, we followed the DILG prescribed planning process. And we focused on the 5 steps. Okay? The first step was to organize and mobilize the planning team. The second step was to revisit existing plans, vision, mission, and sectoral goals. The third step was to prepare the ecological profile to depict the current state of the locality and identify a list of programs, projects, and activities to address the gap between said state and the vision. Now, the fourth step was to prioritize these programs and draft the local development investment program. And finally, the final step would be to prepare the needed implementation instruments. And these would be the capacity development CapDev programs for the LDIP as well as the monitoring and evaluation. Okay. Now, these are our results from the survey. Okay. So almost all municipalities claim to have plans. However, when we checked their period of validity, these plans were mostly not updated. Okay. What do we mean by this? The first circle here looks at the validity of the comprehensive land use plan. And here, 1,254 municipalities claim to have the CLUP. But when we checked, because we asked them what the year of coverage of their most recent CLUPs were, only 64 or 5% of municipalities had CLUPs that were valid within a plus or minus 8-year range from 2018. So the manner by which we reckoned was that we did our field work in 2019. So we said based on 2018, plus or minus 8 years, if the CLUP covered that period, that would be considered as updated. So here, only 5% had updated CLUPs. When we went to the comprehensive development plans, we can see that 89% of municipalities claim to have the comprehensive development plan. But of those that claim to have the comprehensive development plan, only about 490 had those valid within. In this case, it was a 5-year period, plus or minus 5, because the CDP should be valid for 6 years. Now, lastly, from the CDP, you should identify the programs, projects, and activities that you believe would help you get to where you want to go in your vision. When we asked about the presence of the LDIP, 97.7% of municipalities said that they did have an LDIP. But when we check the validity, which is now this time a 3-year period, so it's a plus or minus in 2018, it was only about 31% of municipalities that had valid or updated local development investment program. Now here are the highlights of the results of the specific steps. And I'm happy to say that generally the prescribed guidelines of the DILG are followed, but there are areas for improvement. Now for step 1, okay, which is establishing the municipal planning team as well as identifying the vision and mission, we see here in the circle here that it's the municipal planning development coordinator or the municipal planning teams themselves who are the ones who initiate the development or updating of the CDP, the LDIP, and AIP. So they do know their responsibilities, which is very happy to see. And another very interesting result is when we go to step 2 is that it is nice to know that the vision of municipalities, 48%, are collectively determined by the local development council. So this would go to say that it is recognized by those in the community. It's not identified just by one person. It seems to say that it is collectively owned by those in the development council. Now, the third step, which is determining the current status of the municipality through the ecological profile. It is the DILG has 2 prescribed the data set tools that are the RAPIDS and the LDIS, which are prescribed. But it was interesting to find out that the community-based monitoring system is the primary source of data of 57% of the municipalities. And this is used in the identification of programs, projects, and activities. Now, the CBMS is not just used for their planning. It's also used in identifying priority sectors, as well as the basis of budgeting. However, there is also a cost entailed in implementing this data gathering. So the LGUs have to allocate a budget for the conduct of development tools, though this is not done regularly based on our results. Now, again, this is a rather heavy slide, but if you could bear with me. This one pertains to steps 4 and step 5 of the planning process. Step 4 would be prioritizing the projects needed in the local development investment program. And step 5 would be the capacity development programs available for monitoring and for the LDIP itself. So if you look at the upper quadrant here, we asked what are the tools used by municipalities in screening PPAs for prioritization, because they come up with a long list and then they have to prioritize which to implement. Now, the DILG guidelines offer that there are top 3 tools. The tool 1 is urgency test matrix. Tool 2 is the resource impact matrix. Tool 3 is the conflict comparability complementarity matrix. And though the urgency test matrix is commonly used by about 48% of the municipalities we interviewed, we noticed that the method of workshop and consultations is what is the primary tool used for prioritization of PPAs. So this is not, this was a very interesting result, that they prioritize their projects based on workshops and consultations rather than the tools that were provided by the DILG guidelines. Now, at the lower, continuing on with this idea, at the lower left quadrant, how do municipalities prepare their LDIPs? Well, as I mentioned earlier, 50% of municipalities always prepare project briefs. So that means that there is another proportion of municipalities that don't prepare project briefs regularly. So the challenge with this actually is that it might affect the quality of programs, projects, and activities that will be implemented, and this might have an effect as well on the development and growth in a particular locality. I mentioned this also earlier, 68% of municipality used workshops, consultations as their basis for drafting the LDIP, contrary to the guidelines of tools 1 to 3 prescribed by DILG. And for this particular column, 68% of municipalities conducted a second round of prioritization. So in the DILG guidelines, there should be a long list, and then there should be a prioritization, first round, and then there should be a second round of prioritization. And according to the results of our survey, only 68% of municipalities did in fact do a second round of prioritization. Now, as we know, and as I mentioned earlier, this LDIP is valid for 3 years. In order to be able to implement this, projects must be prioritized per year on an annual basis, which is why there is what you call the annual investment program. So if you go to the upper right quadrant of the slide, how do municipalities finance their annual investment program? So here it says we found that about half of surveyed municipalities were unable to finance their entire AIPs. And 51% of these resorted to looking for other sources of financing. And this has huge implications later as well as for the mandanas, the effect of the mandalas ruling. So if you can see here, 51.64% looked for other sources of financing, and 47.2% had received grant type funding. So this grant type funding were funding typically received from national government agency programs to assist local governments in the delivery of devolved services. So another interesting result, which I'll go back to later on when I discuss the entire planning budgeting framework, is that only 8.23% of the funding that's received by municipalities is endorsed by the Regional Development Council. So this is one of the proper methods of seeking additional financing. Ideally, it should go through the Regional Development Council. What happens is that almost 39% is requested directly by the LGUs to the national government agencies, such as the DILG or the DPWH. So there, to end this slide, the lower right quadrant, how do municipalities monitor and evaluate their projects? Here we can see that only 38% of municipalities claim to have monitoring and evaluation mechanisms for their comprehensive development plan. And 82% of municipalities claim to have some capacity development programs for implementing the LDI. Now, some general findings and recommendations for this first study. Well, the first issue was the need for updating of plans. And one of the recommendations is to enforce strict compliance with the local government code mandate requiring the local governments to regularly update their plans. And I know that there have been continuous efforts on the part of the DILG. In fact, there was a memorandum circular issued last October. However, of course, I don't know how it plays out right now with the current condition of under this pandemic. Now, the second issue that we identified was that the data set or the used for ecological profiling is rather different than what is indicated. So perhaps oversight committees, oversight agencies can revisit the rapids or reorient municipalities on its use for ecological profiling. Because if I understand correctly, elements of the CBMS actually are part of the rapids and the LDIS. Third, the insufficient observance of ensuring the feasibility and quality of proposed investment programs compromise potential development. As I mentioned earlier, it's important that you know and prioritize your programs, projects, and activities. And this would require compliance by municipalities to ensure project feasibility. This may need capacity building interventions in the preparation of project briefs to ensure feasibility and improve the quality of investments. The fourth is the evidence on arbitrary and lack of prioritization of investment programs could result in less impactful development projects and inefficient use of resources. So this is just to highlight to municipalities the importance of following the two-round shortlisting and using the DILG prescribed criteria in prioritization, or perhaps right now would be the best time to revisit these criteria and work closely with local governments as well in the process of prioritizing programs, projects, and activities. And lastly, refers to the CapDev instruments available to the local government. So here, strengthen CapDev, especially in monitoring and evaluation projects. Okay, so the second study is an offshoot of the first study. And this lies heavily, the results of this study relies heavily on the results of the baseline study. So here, we assess the Philippine local government planning and budgeting framework. Now, what is the motivation behind this? In 2005, the World Bank found weak institutionalized planning in LGUs and a disconnect between national and regional provincial planning. In 2015, the DILG reported that only half of LGUs had formulated CDPs, and our results in the baseline study showed that only about 40% for those municipalities are updated. I'm just highlighting here the COA reports also, which identify poor planning, monitoring, and prioritization of development projects as some reasons behind the underutilization of the development fund. And as well, another motivation is the anticipated increase in intergovernmental fiscal transfers because of the Supreme Court's Mandanas ruling, which implies a larger amount, a broader tax base for the computation of these transfers, which would imply a larger amount going to LGUs, which would therefore imply a larger mandated amount of at least 20% going to the local development fund. So the research questions are very simple. What is the current planning and budgeting framework for local governments? How is it situated in the national government planning and budgeting framework? And what are areas for improvement? The objectives primarily is to map out current local planning and budgeting framework in relation to national government planning and budgeting, And one of the motivations behind this is that there have been recent efforts really to align vertical integration of local plans to the Philippine Development Plan, so that although we recognize the independence and the autonomy of local governments and their prioritization, it's also nice to be able to map out how they contribute to the development of the entire Philippines. Now, another objective is to identify strengths, weaknesses, and areas of improvement in this particular framework. Okay. So the data and methodology, we use mixed methods, process evaluation using primary and secondary data. Desk review, we use the results of the baseline study, which I won't repeat anymore in our discussion. And then we use the KIIs with LGUs and oversight agencies. Now, this is a summary of the larger oversight national government agencies when it comes to local governments. So we have the DILG, of course, which is there to establish, mandate, and formulate plans, policies, and programs to enhance administrative, technical, and fiscal capabilities of LGUs. We have the DBM and the DBM regional offices that issue annual local budget memoranda, review annual budgets of provinces, cities, municipalities in Metro Manila, and also update the LGU chart of accounts with COA. We have the NEDA and the Regional Development Councils under them, which are tasked to integrate approved plans of provinces, highly urbanized cities, ICCs, in the regional development plans and in the Philippine Development Plan. They are also tasked as well to formulate public investment programs, similar to the LDIP earlier that I mentioned. And we also have the DOF, the Bureau of Local Government Finance, which is tasked to supervise revenue operations and resource mobilization of LGU. So this is the mapping of the Philippine government planning and budgeting framework. So here we have, this is a rather heavy slide, we have the entire Philippine budgeting and planning framework. So at the bottom here is what we had just discussed. This is the municipal, this would apply to the municipal and the component city development planning and budgeting process. So we had discussed the results of our baseline study on development planning for the municipality and how this 6-year plan should be embodied, instrumentalized in programs, projects, and activities in the 3-year LDIP, which should be broken down into 1-year annual investment programs that could be financed in the annual budget. So let's spend a bit of more time on the local planning and budgeting framework map. So that's the lower row I just highlighted earlier. So this one, if you see the gray shaded area, this one already we had discussed. This looks at the development planning process and how it figures into the annual investment program. So I won't repeat this anymore. We just discussed this process, but the annual investment program should find itself into the local annual budget. And this is the local annual budget process. It's very similar to the national budgeting process. We start first with budget preparation. So there's a budget call, and the different divisions would prepare their budget depending on their budget scheme. Afterwards, there's budget authorization and review. So it has to be enacted, just as in the case of the National Expenditure Program, it will become law as the GAA. Such would be the case for local governments. It would be an appropriation ordinance. But one thing I'd like to highlight here is that higher levels of government may review the appropriation ordinances of lower levels of government. So this means that provinces would have the mandate to review the appropriation ordinances of component cities and municipalities. Now, once the appropriation ordinance has been approved, this will already be executed throughout the year, and it would be followed with the review, budget accountability, and monitoring and evaluation, so that the results of the implementation in that particular year would feed back into the budget preparation of the succeeding fiscal year. So that's it. These are the principles in local budgeting, and they're very similar also to national budgeting. It should be policy-based. Here, it's recognized that local governments have their own priorities, but it should be harmonized in the development plans and reflected as well in their investment programs. Now, procurement, planning, and budgeting linkage. There should also be a linkage between the project procurement management plan, and it should be consolidated into an annual procurement plan. Budgeting should also be performance informed. It uses performance information in appropriation documents to link funding to results and to provide for a more informed resource allocation and management. And budgeting should also be participatory. So this was taken from the budget of manuals dated 2016. Okay. Now let's go back to the overall mapping. And what is important to highlight here is that we show the role that local governments, municipalities, and cities play in trying to attain the long-term vision of Ambition Natin 2040. So Ambition Natin 2040, we know, is a long-term view. And each administration, we know, drafts what you call the Philippine Development Plan. In our case, it's for 2017 to 2022. And right now, mid-year, and because of the COVID pandemic, I know that we are government authorities now are reviewing as well the PDP. But this PDP, there have always been efforts to be able to integrate it with the regional development plan that would be drafted based on the provincial development plan. So that's the first column here. So the mandates allow for the NEDA through the Regional Development Council to have an iterative process with the provincial government, Provincial Development Council, in order to be able to draft a regional development plan. Now, this later on we will see is part of the current efforts of the national government to integrate and the entire planning process. But what could be improved would be actually the linkage between the municipal city development plan with the provincial development plans, because there is limited evidence as to whether this in fact occurs. And the same thing happens for investment programs. But what's important here is that the arrows are two ways. So it's an iterative process. Each municipalities, component cities, and provinces are recognized to have their own different needs and priorities. But it's important also to recognize how they can contribute to national development. Now, the process follows also similarly for public investment programs. These are the programs, projects, and activities identified in the planning process that would get the municipality or the national government where it wants to get at the end of each term. But here, the process is not so iterative. By the NEDA ADB guidelines, it's really unique what local governments need in their localities in terms of development projects is unique. So this should hopefully, ideally, feed into provincial development investment program, which should find its way into the regional investment program and subsequently the public investment program. Now, similar also to local governments, that have 3-year programs that have to find its way into an annual budget. The public investment program is a 6-year thing at the national level. So we have to figure out how to break it down into the annual General Appropriations Act, which is drafted based on the National Expenditure Program or the President's Budget, which is drafted by the Department of Budget and Management based on submissions of national government agencies. And here it's very interesting to highlight that I mentioned earlier that not all municipalities are able to finance their annual investment programs. So they seek grants from elsewhere. They seek funding from elsewhere. Some of them, I think it was 8%, seek grants from the Regional Development Council, through the Regional Development Council. Some would go to the province, but most would go directly to national government agencies that have programs that are there to assist local governments in the delivery of their basic services. So this as well would have implications moving forward for when the Mandanas rule would be implemented. Okay, so for local planning, some findings and current efforts. As earlier, there is a need to encourage the updating of local plans. There's also a need to ensure the quality of PPAs. In our study, we found that in 2019, the DILG and NEDA had a program called the Localization of the PDP, which offered capacity building on identifying development outcomes crafting of investment programs, and identifying what is needed to translate these programs into fiscal programs. So these are current efforts that could possibly be continued. Section 114 of the Local Government Code indicates that local development plans may be integrated with those of the next higher level of local development councils. However, it is articulated explicitly that the integration of provincial plans and investment programs to the PDP is mandated, and it should be done through the NEDA's RDC. Now, since provinces are seen as an important link in the harmonization of municipal city development plans, there is a need for strengthened oversight to ensure the integration of municipal and component city plans into provincial plans so that there is the contribution can be seen. Now, for local budgeting, some findings and current efforts, though local government units are given the autonomy to determine their own budget, there are also mandates that allow for review by provincial governments of the appropriations ordinances of component cities and municipalities, and by the DBM regional offices of provincial, highly urbanized, and independent component appropriation budget. Now, for the first sub-bullet here, the provincial government oversight, there is limited evidence showing regarding this. So this could perhaps also be something looked at by our national government oversight agencies. One current effort, well, not so current, this was in 2015, the oversight agencies institutionalized the Coordinating Committee on Decentralization, the National Interagency Team, and the Regional Interagency Teams for better convergence across the different levels of local governments and with the national government to enhance public financial management. And what we learned as of the date of our study, which was last year, at the RIAT offers capacity buildings for local budget forum on budget and expenditures management and guidelines. But the NIAT, which is a technical working group under the CCD, had yet at the time to be convened. So some final remarks. Ensuring the attainment of development depends on the ability to implement well-laid plans. Strengthening planning, this entails both identifying needs in priority sectors, interventions necessary to attain development goals, and carefully crafting programs, projects, and activities to attain these goals. Across different levels of local governments, policies should encourage the vertical integration of plans and investment programs, though still recognizing the autonomy. And there is a need to establish expertise at the provincial level to mentor municipal counterparts. Now, financing these plans in the budget, there is a need to continue efforts of convergence in oversight agencies and continue moving towards integrated management information for real-time monitoring of PPAs, implementation, and budget utilization, as well as finally strengthening and monitoring evaluation functions guidelines within the context of convergence efforts as well. So that ends my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justine, for your comprehensive presentation. As mentioned by Dr. Reyes, we invited two experts to give their perspective on the issues discussed by Dr. Sicat. So they will comment on the study's findings and recommendations, and they will also share their insights on how we can address the fiscal and governance gaps identified in the study. Our first discussant is Mayor Cynthia Falcotelo-Fortes of Barcelona in Sorsogon Province. She's also the Secretary General of the League of Municipalities of the Philippines. A lawyer by profession, Mayor Fortes served as public prosecutor in the city of Manila and Quezon City, where she also taught criminal procedure in law schools. She was city trial court judge of Sorsogon City before she became mayor in 2019. Friends, here now is Mayor Cynthia Falcotelo-Fortes. Ma'am?
My due thanks. Hello. My due thanks to the leaderships of the Department of Interior and Local Government and the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, especially the author presenter, Dr. Justine Diokno-Sicat, and all the attendees. Just as I am steered by the responsibility you have put upon me, I am proud to be sharing online space with you all. Historically, my municipality is on the receiving end of grant type assistance and the LGSF-AM, from local access roads to improvement of water systems to extension of water connection. The last time I counted, 2 of those 10 grants thus far were cascaded this current year, one of which came into the coffers only 6 days past on July 10, 2020. It is an LGSF-AM 11 million assistance for local access road leading to a Mount Agingay tourism site. So I am thanking LGSF-AM and the DILG and DBM and all the agencies that make this happen. The papers were enriching, to say the least. Both have, in good measure, value-added qualities to them. They provided clear visuals on the surveyed municipalities' inadequacies in terms of well-laid development plans on key areas, thus resulting in gaps on development plans, policy, fiscal, governance gaps. I emphasized surveyed municipalities because current figures on local government units tell that municipalities totaled 1,488, with the birth in September 2019 of Santo Tomas City, then the municipality of Santo Tomas, Batangas. Juxtaposed with the 1,373 municipalities PIDS surveyed, there appears to be a variance, a gap of 115. Be that as it may, from the lens of a local chief executive, they prod one to pause briefly into introspection. How is my LGU proceeding in terms of development? Are its planning process and instruments law compliant and DILG compliant? Did I obey Section 444 of the Local Government Code, mandating that LCE should direct the formulation of development plans and implement the same? Sadly, we saw it from the presentation. A big slice of the pie chart pointed to the MPDOs as authors of development plans. The LGSF-AM paper ushered in an impression that planning is the one giant step to a successful implementation of any PPA, so that municipalities need to get it right the first time, not to be doing a rework each time. Planning should be strengthened, the paper enthused. The way to do it is by identifying priority sectors, identifying interventions purposely to attain development goals, carefully crafting PPAs, vertical integration of plans, establishing expertise at the provincial level. To my mind, breaking down the second into specifics by clearly defining into the process the identification of development goals would be a shot in the arm in further strengthening planning. At the risk of rhapsodizing about the paper, the LGSF-AM paper, I must say that I am on all fours with its findings that attainment of development depends on the ability to implement well-crafted, well-laid plans. Competencies are the order of the day in development and governance. That said, the notion of mentoring referenced above comes into play. Self-sufficiency is a wonderful thing, but mentors help get the real work done. With a mentor, it is not like walking through the dark for the municipalities, but being guided by a local governance expert veering toward the right direction where the goals are, and most likely with zero chance of a pitfall. Adding a caveat of my own, local governance expertise should be contextualized vis-a-vis the profiles, attributes, and requirements of a given municipality, which is in need of a helping hand. The same way that development plans are customized, an expert shouldn't be a square peg in a round hole. The paper offered fresh hope, referencing to DILG Coordinating Committee on Decentralization and the efforts of convergence in oversight national agencies. Those efforts are beyond municipalities' domain, but real-time monitoring of PPA's implementation and fund utilization is antidote to lacking project briefs or project briefs wanting in built-in feedback mechanism on the part of the LCE. It must be added that the vertical disconnect referenced in the second paper has been closed with the relatively recent effort of NEDA to align LGU's development plans to the national government's Ambition Natin 2040. This process is taking place now in consonance with the local government code. In summation, I am happy to state for the record that the papers made their case. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Fortes, for your thought-provoking remarks, ma'am.
Thank you.
Friends, we are also privileged to have an esteemed academic join us in this webinar, and our second discussant is Dr. Paul Hutchcroft, a scholar of comparative and Southeast Asian politics who has written extensively on Philippine politics and political economy. He first arrived in the Philippines in 1980 and has returned as often as possible and also traveled throughout the archipelago. Currently, he is a professor in the Department of Political and Social Change at the Australian National University and was from 2009 to 2013 the founding director of the School of International Political and Strategic Studies in ANU's College of Asia and the Pacific. From 2013 to 2017, Dr. Hutchcroft was based in the Philippines as lead governance specialist with the Australian Aid Program. Here now is Dr. Paul Hutchcroft.
Maraming salamat, Sheila, and thanks as well to Dr. Reyes and to all those at PIDS and DILG that have made this event possible. I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to learn from the excellent analysis of Justine-Sicat and her team, they have produced two very important baseline studies on critical issues of local governance in the Philippines. I'm also grateful to have heard the insights from Mayor Fortes from the beautiful town of, beautiful municipality of Barcelona in Sorsogon. I've never been to Barcelona, Spain, but I've been to Barcelona, and it is indeed a beautiful place. So I also want to do a shout out to some friends that I have that I see here that I haven't seen for many years, in one case, many decades. So magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. Maayong hapon kaninyong tanan. So I have prepared some slides that I would like to go through, and want to begin just with some reflections about our current situation globally, more specifically the situation in the Philippines. We are having this webinar at, first of all, a time in which there's been a great deal of discussion about possible major changes in the nature of central-local relations in the Philippines, particularly all of the talk of federalism in the early parts of the Duterte administration. Now, a lot of that talk of federalism, in my view, basically took the oxygen away from what are very important reform opportunities in issues of fiscal and governance gaps in LGUs in the Philippines, to draw on our title for today. And so we are taking up this topic at a point when it is possible to think about, I think, some realistic solutions towards the gaps that are being addressed here, and leaving behind some of the pie in the sky ideas of instituting federalism. I'm in the camp of those who have spoken of the fortunate falter of federalism in the Philippines. So I'm glad to go beyond that and to be looking, I think, much more practically at some reform opportunities. So if we could move on to the next slide. So the first reflection on the current context is that we are in this period after federalism has taken so much attention in discussions of central local relations in the Philippines. And we're also doing this in the midst of a massive pandemic that often makes it difficult to discuss reform and to be thinking about long-term solutions, long-term reforms, let alone medium-term solutions. I think that it's critical that we do so despite the pandemic. And in fact, the pandemic makes it even more critical that we look at some of these basic issues of governance gaps and fiscal gaps that Dr. Sicat and her team have so nicely highlighted in their two baseline papers. So moving on, I want to talk about some important contributions from the studies, and then if we have time, I don't know if we will, some other ideas that I have on issues of improving decentralization outcomes in the Philippines. So let me start off with just a look at a basic paradox of decentralization. This comes from a scholar who's been influential in my own work, who notes that one of the most curious aspects of decentralization is the responsibility that a national government must assume to assure the realization that decentralization, as doctrinally advocated, is supposed to serve. So in other words, paradoxically, decentralization requires a strong and capable central state able to enforce the rules by which authority is being devolved to the subnational level. And I think that the authors of Dr. Sicat and her fellow authors have very much, maybe not explicitly, but implicitly recognized this important paradox. A corollary to that is to look at differential outcomes of decentralization. That is especially in the absence of a strong and capable central state able to enforce the rules by which authority is being devolved to the subnational level. We should expect to see substantial variation in outcomes from one locale to the next. In some places, decentralization brings government closer to the people, and we can anticipate that devolved responsibilities and enhanced resources are more likely to be well utilized for the public good. But in other places, decentralization makes local government the preserve of powerful local elites and clans. And here we can anticipate that devolved responsibilities and enhanced resources may often be captured for private gain at the expense of public good. So I want to highlight those basic thoughts about decentralization before I move on. Next slide, please, to look at an important issue that has been highlighted in the first study, and that is local revenue generation. So the first study starkly shows the critical need for municipalities to close the gap in key devolved infrastructure services and to generate more revenue toward that end. And I think the paradox of decentralization suggests that local government units are unlikely to be able to do it on their own, particularly in a patronage-based polity. It is rare for local politicians to want to raise taxes. Now, there are exceptions, of course. There are those that make a case to the citizenry that basically says, we're going to be raising taxes if it's okay with you, but you can be assured that I will do everything I can to make sure that those taxes are improving basic public services. Now, one possible solution that I think is part of the Department of Finance tax packages is the National Valuation Act. And that basically lifts up, as I understand, the updating of scheduled market valuations from the local level to the national level. And I think this has a lot of potential to help local governments to generate more revenue, in particular from real property taxes. So I think that's an important proposal that is out there. I'm sorry, I don't know the current state of that as it makes its way through the Philippine Congress, but I do recall it was part of one of the tax packages. So we can move on from there. A critical issue is just reducing high levels of dependence on the ERA. As Justine's study shows, in 2016, 76% of local revenue came from the internal revenue allotment, meaning it was not generated locally, but coming from the center. So I want to offer some thoughts on the internal revenue allotment. We can move on to the next slide. And that is to look at best practice versus actual practice. And I'm drawing on the work of a friend and colleague at the University of the Philippines School of Economics, Professor Joseph Capuno here. So arguably, the most important and the most contentious element of the 1991 Local Government Code is the internal revenue allotment. Professor Capuno notes that best practice is something like this: when decentralizing national government functions, powers, or responsibilities to local government, the appropriate public services to devolve should first be determined, after which the requisite revenues or revenue raising authority to finance the devolved expenditure functions can be decided. So you first want to figure out what is to be done, then you work out the revenue issues. In actuality, because finance does not follow functions that were not aptly assigned to local governments, local government officials soon clamored for additional money from the national government. Since the incremental ERA shares were not linked to the cost of devolved functions, local governments considered the first as their entitlement under local autonomy and the latter as unfunded mandates. So that's a note about what best practice is and how actual practice has worked under the internal revenue allotment. Moving on to the next slide. As I said, there's a great deal of contention over the formula, as we all know, for ERA. Move on here. There's been no revision on that, as we know, on how to divide it, even as there's been significant differences in levels of dependence on ERA. Does it really make sense for Quezon City and Makati to continue to have large dollops of ERA coming their way? That's a question to be considered. Secondly, there is soon to be a major increase in funds that will be coming to local government units through the Mandanas ruling. There have been major battles across time along three key fissures. This is something that I wrote up many years ago in the Philippine Review of Economics on the politics of ERA. And there I highlighted that you can find contention between the national executive and governors/mayors. That's when Palace sometimes has tried to bring about curbs and delays in disbursement of ERA in past administrations. Secondly, between national legislators and governors and mayors over control of budgetary resources. The Congressional Planning and Budget Office about 20 years ago characterized the ERA as being primarily used to increase the salaries of local government personnel and acts as a disincentive to local revenue generation. Thirdly, among and within categories of local chief executives, there has been considerable contention. And that is, for example, between mayors of cities and mayors of towns. Across all levels, everybody wants to have more, of course. So that's been an important source of contention through the years. And there was one case that even went to the Supreme Court trying to decide whether 16 towns might be able to become cities, and it went back and forth before they were finally allowed to make that transition. So the ERA formula is highly contentious. We can go on to the next slide, please. Keep going here. And the politics of the ERA has generated lots of tensions between Congress and governors mayors. 20 years ago, I spoke with former Speaker pro tempore Tony Cuenco. May he rest in peace. He's recently succumbed, as I understand, to the COVID-19 virus, and someone who has years of work as a leader in Cebu politics. But I had a chance to talk with him many years ago, and he spoke very frankly about some of these political dynamics. If we could go on. Because most congresspersons had political rivals among the governors and mayors, it was their natural tendency not to yield to these people who would screw them. The last thing they wanted to do was to give away anything that had to do with public works. That remained at the national level. A concern was how increased revenue allotments to local government would reduce the pork available to congresspersons to build and consolidate their constituencies. He said very frankly, more money, more power, it's that simple. Congresspersons are said to have found decentralization most objectionable when the local officials in their districts were bitter rivals. In some cases, congresspersons were at war with their own relatives and didn't want their brothers to have more power, quote unquote. But we also know that there are cases where congresspersons enjoy close ties with officials in their districts who may be relatives as well, or they may be nurturing plans to run for office and reap the benefits themselves. So that's some of the important dynamics. I think we really need to look at the politics of the era when we're looking at the larger issues of trying to increase local revenue generation. So let's continue. I'll move on to one last slide on the era, and that is looking at how the era ended a period of unpredictable dependence and brought a more predictable type of dependence. So if we could, as Noel DeJose of the UP School of Economics, Professor DeJose has highlighted, many local government units are almost exclusively reliant on the era for financing, treating it basically as a dole. The ready availability of these funds provides no incentive either to augment revenues or to use them effectively. He also notes that assured revenue transfers have not weaned local politics away from the imperative of securing additional resources. I think we've seen that in Justine's data, the need for looking for additional resources. And some of that seeking of additional resources comes through networks of patronage and vertical transactions with the center. So Professor DeJose notes that the patronage relationship remains intact. I have noted that the stated goal of the era way back 30 years ago was to try to undercut the dependence of local governments on the national government. But in my view, the most important shift has been in the character of that dependence, from a notoriously unpredictable dependence before 1991 to a relatively more predictable dependence after 1991. At the same time, the era has brought forth an important reslicing of the pie of patronage, creating important new opportunities for discretionary funding at the local level. Next slide, please. So the study that we have just had presented cites important reasons why municipalities often do not use their local development fund: poor planning, lack of coordination, absence of monitoring. Also of critical importance, the study notes the issue of low absorptive capacity. So I think this suggests, and it was there in the final slide of Justine's presentation, that this suggests the need to examine both planning processes and implementation processes. Implementation, of course, follows on planning and requires administrative capacity. So that raises the question, is this in good supply at the local level? And as someone who's been looking at local government's issues in the Philippines, I will say that I am amazed at how little attention there is to the basic issue of the quality of local bureaucracy. So let's move on a bit into the next slide. There is a provision in the local government code that provides local chief executives with the capacity to employ emergency or casual employees, some through job orders for local projects. And these are supposed to be up to 6 months. If we could move on there. So a key question is whether local governments have the quality of administrative staff required for increasingly complex governance and local service delivery at the local level. A study by my colleague here at the Australian National University, Hal Hill, as well as Professor R.C. Balisacan and Sharon Pisa more than 10 years ago, noted that local governments continue to employ a significant number of non-career staff, which is an a priori indicator that normal recruitment procedures have been bypassed. According to a 2005 World Bank report, non-career staff are about nearly 39% of local government personnel versus a little less than 5% of central government personnel. Let's look at some more recent data coming from the Civil Service Commission. I want you to look just at what is highlighted there in yellow, particularly at the bottom. Career employees at the national government level are nearly 87%, and casual and job orders are only about a total of 11%. But when we look at LGUs, career personnel are less than half, and casual and job orders are somewhere around 45%. So this affirms that the data from an earlier World Bank study, the one I cited just a bit ago from 2005, still has a lot of validity as of 2015 as well. Key point, you get a much larger percentage of casual and job orders at the local level. I want to proceed just to some anecdotal evidence, if I might, from my extensive travels around the years, often to observe elections, going into the provincial office of a national government agency in a southern Tagalog province in 2010. I was struck at how the people, not yet on Bicol, let's pull back on that one, I'll do them one at a time. The Southern Tagalog experience was one in which it was obvious that the people who did the work were at the back of the office, but to get to them, one had to walk by lots of people who were presumably casual employees because they didn't have much to do, sitting and reading the newspaper, filing their nails or whatever. This is not productive labor, to say the least, and it's no way to get development projects actually implemented. Another, we can go on to the next one, experience that I heard about in Bicol in 2013, again around election time, was just the brilliance of a local province that managed to take one public service position and divide it into 12 different posts. So 24 different posts rather. So 24 people got a casual job for 15 days. Everybody got it for half a month. And so they were able thereby to reward 24 of their political supporters to come in. Now, maybe these people were incredibly productive across their 15 days in government, but it is a level of turnover that suggests it's not going to be the best way to bring about development outcomes. Next came in Iloilo. This is Iloilo City Hall in 2019, where there were two colors of employees within the City Hall. There were the plantilla employees that had their uniforms, but then there were others that were in these blue t-shirts, and they were the casual employees brought in by the former mayor to try to reward people. And I don't speak Ilonggo, but according to the local researcher that I was with, he overheard a conversation in our elevator in which a couple of them said, well, our gig is up in about 5 weeks, isn't it? You know, because they didn't expect the mayor to win. They were just enjoying what they were doing at that point. Again, high level of turnover is probably not the best way to bring about highest levels of productivity. I'll just briefly note a couple other things from two cities in the Visayas where signature projects in two major cities, we can go on here, were able to, were lacking continuity in their staff for those projects. This is something that you would expect those cities to want to be putting a lot of resources into, but high turnover across both of those. We can proceed then. On the other side of the ledger, I have also in many places around the country seen very impressive levels of continuity and capacity, particularly in local planning and development offices. And getting back to the key, one of the key elements of these baseline papers, the importance of better planning. There are, I think, some important islands of strength, if you will, that can be built on where planning officers, this is anecdotal evidence, sometimes seem to have a bit more continuity than other bits of local local government administrative structures. So how can capacity be enhanced? Building stronger bureaucratic capacity is a huge challenge, all the more in patronage-centric polities. Whoever figures out how to do it should get a Nobel Prize in political science. The only problem is there's no Nobel Prize in political science, but it's a tough conundrum. It's a difficult thing to do. And the study suggested the need to strengthen capacity development programs in monitoring and evaluation. I would just highlight also the need to make sure that capacity development be promoted for those who are implementing the project. The second study highlights the importance of intervention/institutional support from oversight NGAs, and let's look at them as a group and move on to the next slide, which I think is my almost final slide. 4 oversight agencies are highlighted: DILG, looking at core oversight and development; DBM, expenditure; NEDA and RDCs, looking at planning; and DOF and its Bureau of Local Government Finance, looking at revenue issues. And some important points in the study about the need to try to build up more vertical integration. Provincial planning should include city and municipal plans, and establish expertise at the provincial level to mentor municipal counterparts. So on to my final slide. Picking up on this final point of study 2, the importance of ensuring the attainment of development depends on the ability to implement well-laid. In order to do so, I think it's critical to put in place the right level of administrative capacity, and this means the best personnel possible, suggesting as well a need for a possible 5th national oversight agency involved in what would be a long-term challenging project, and that agency would be the Civil Service Commission. So I'll leave it at that. Again, thank you very much, Justine, to you and your team for all the terrific insights that you have generated from your study.
Thank you very much, Professor Hutchcroft, for your thought-provoking comments. Before we start our Q&A, may I ask Dr. Sicat for her brief response to the comments of our discussants?
Yes, thank you, Sheila. I'll see how I can keep it brief because the comments of Professor Hutchcroft are pretty long, but I'll manage well. Thank you very much, Mayor Fortes, and thank you very much, Professor Hutchcroft, for your comments. I'm glad that I made my case as the case Mayor Fortes said, and she's very sharp still in observing that there were more than 1,373 municipalities, and that is correct. The project that we tackled covered only the municipalities, excluding those of BARM, which are 115 in number. Because of at the time they were undergoing a reorganization in their regional structure. So that's the reason why. I also appreciate your comments and I agree exactly with the contextualized implementation of reforms. It has to be unique. Each municipality is different. So the manner by which development planning can be enhanced and capacity building can be enhanced would also depend on what the existing conditions in a particular municipality is. So thank you for that also. And it's good to hear that there is continuing efforts in the vertical integration between NEDA and local governments as well. So thank you very much, Mayor Fortes, for that. Professor Hutchcroft, I appreciate the discussion of both the paradox of decentralization and the differential outcomes of decentralization. And this is exactly what we have been observing and have been trying to explain for the longest time. I'm glad that you brought up the Train 3 package on the National Valuation Act. I'm also incredibly supportive of that. In that particular, and I think the DLGF is here. Perhaps they can update us on that. But under that, they are making because the real property taxes should be the main source of local revenue effort. However, recent years, it has been overtaken by local business taxes. And the question was probably answered because of the reason that only 8 in the terms of provinces, the schedule of market value, which is the basis of the computation of the real property tax, is about 10 years old. It's not regular that they would update the schedule of market value, which would imply that the revenue collections would not be up to market value. So what the National Valuation Act, I agree with you absolutely, is doing is if there will be a single value that would be the basis of the computation of the real property tax, as well as the LGUs would determine what the schedule of market value would be, but the DOF would approve because it was very challenging, I think. In terms of ERA, yes, I absolutely agree with you also. The formula for ERA, 50% population, 25% land area, 25% equal sharing has always been a challenge, which is why some municipalities want to become cities which is why boundaries are being increased and not. And I know before from my research that the original proposal was that the intergovernmental fiscal transfer would only be about 20%, with 5% additional depending on a performance indicator. But then it went through the whole process in Congress, and it turned out to be 40% across the board with the ERA formula there. So with regard to low absorptive capacity, that's also a very important factor that Professor Hutchcroft mentioned. So thank you for that. So it's not just with the planning, but it's also with the implementation, because there could be reasons why there's low absorptive capacity when it comes to development, the development projects. So we could take a look at that also, budget accountability study or something like that. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned also about the quality of the administration and looking into the job orders, because we would also always hear anecdotes of this. And that's a very important thing, but I don't know to what extent the civil service has been taking this on. So thank you very much. I hope I addressed your comments and questions as best as I could. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justine. Now we are ready to entertain your questions for our Q&A. Aside from Dr. Sicat, Professor Hutchcroft, and Mayor Fortes, we will be joined by Assistant Director Alfonso Marali of the Bureau of Local Government Development, or BLGD, and Mr. Richard Villicor, the Manager of DILG Support to Local Governance Program, or SGLP. And for our first question, if I may address this, if I may throw or address this to Professor Hutchcroft, since he has extensively studied the political economy and politics in the Philippines. Paul, I hope this is okay. And this question is from Karema Bagas, and and this is about this is about identity politics in the Philippines, and also the effect of political dynasties. And she said the political climate is a challenge to crafting, implementing and updating of the development plan. Sadly, identity politics is at the fore when it comes to conceptualizing development outcomes. Things like what is visible and what can become a legacy. This notwithstanding the dynamic motivation of political families across all levels of LGUs. May we have your comment on this, Paul?
Well, thank you. Certainly any analysis of local governments has to look at the strong role of families at the local level. I would just highlight that polities throughout the world, political systems throughout the world have families in them. The Philippines is not unique in having a strong role for families. To my mind, the critical thing is the institutional context within which clans and families are involved in political competition. So we're never going to get rid of families. We're never going to get rid of clans, but they are going to be especially important in weakly institutionalized environments. So to my mind, the most important way to deal with the problem of dynasties in the Philippines, and we know that it's a huge issue, is not through prohibitions, because I don't think A, they're likely to work, or B, they're likely to get through, but rather measures that are intended to strengthen the larger institutional environment, and I think in particular of the need to strengthen political parties in the Philippines. This highlights at the local level how, and in the local government code, the electoral systems that are used to elect local government officials are pretty much those that guarantee the weakness of political parties by having executives and vice executives being elected separately, and also through the system by which provincial, city, and town councils are elected, something called a multi-member plurality system. And as Nico Ravanilia, now of UC San Diego, has highlighted, this is really a way that ensures intra-party competition and weak parties. So there's all kinds of talk. It's been going on for 30 years about improving civil society role in local governments. There's way too little attention to how to strengthen political parties. So I think that if we're interested in weakening the role of families, the most important way to do it is to try to strengthen parties. The best way to do that is to look at changes in the electoral system. And it's in the electoral or in the local government code. I'm not a lawyer, but I think it could be changed without a constitutional amendment. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Paul. A question related to that is from Christian Nobleza. And Justine, if I may throw this to you. Does the study have results about how politics become an intervening agent that prevents the actualization of planning, developmental efforts, and the budget process in LGUs?
Okay, thank you for that question, Mr. Nobleza. No, it does not, as of the moment. This report actually, being a baseline study, we focused really on gathering the facts as we could. So it was a tremendous effort. It was a 7-page instrument. We had to ask a survey company to go around all municipalities, except for those in Barn, to gather the data. So as of now, this itself actually is a tremendous effort, but there will be efforts in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justine. This next question is again for you, and this concerns about the findings of your study. And this question is from Crisia Enriquez. Crisia works at the Asia Foundation Coalition for Change, and she asked, what might be the reasons why earlier baseline shows 76% of LGUs underspent their LDF, while 55% were unable to finance their entire annual investment programs or annual investment plans? Do LGUs plan projects too optimistically? Justine?
Okay, thank you for that question, Ms. Enriquez. Unfortunately, the data would not be able to really indicate what the reason behind it, what it is. But we would hear anecdotes about that. There's no substantiated evidence yet regarding this, but it's a very important point to highlight that the utilization of the LDF is low, and that 55% of funding needs to be sourced outwards. And I think the COA would be our basic source for the information behind that. Thank you.
Justine, this next question is actually related to that, and this one is from Joel Lassam, and he asked if your thoughts if the underspending is deliberate to shore up savings, or is it structural because of capacity? Wondering also if mobilizing grants is a function of ease than using local funds that are tied up with complex procurement controls. What do you think?
Thank you, Mr. Lassam, for that. And I think the answer could be all of the above, but our studies do not show this particular evidence. We would hear these stories that there are some instances when, since there's no expiration to the local development fund, it could be kept for as long as wanted. There's also some instances for delayed implementation because of the late receiving of the grants and all that. So the study does not, our statistics yet cannot quite explain exactly or identify, but those could all possibly be reasons behind this, depending on, again, contextualizing it, differential municipalities and different governance across the municipalities. So I don't know if Paul has anything to say about this, but thank you.
Paul, would you like to comment on this? Okay, no comment. Okay, if I may throw this next question to our officials from the DILG, either Assistant Director Marali or Mr. Richard Villacorte, the Project Manager of SGLP. And this question is from Maria Cristina Alvarez, and she asks, what is the difference between RAPIDS and CBMS? And why does the DILG prescribe RAPIDS instead of CBMS when in fact DILG should be the one to ensure compliance of the LGUs in the various CBMM activities and assist PSA in the conduct and implementation of CBMS. AD Marali or Mr. Villacorte, your answer, please. Hello, sir. AD Marali or Mr. Villacorte. Sir Richard? Hello, Sir Richard.
Okay.
Yes, did you get the question, sir? Did you hear the question?
Yes, I hear the question. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Very
Okay.
well.
Okay. The CDP guide that the DILG has prepared is way back 2007 or something, thereabouts. Okay. I'm not very good at the years that was spent for that. So at that time, CBMS is not yet that. Is not yet the CBMS that we now know that has already been the subject of a law. So in short, the requirements that the DILG made in the manual is based on what was prevailing then. Okay, but it has not yet been within the context of the CBMS law. Okay. So I know for a fact that because of the CBMS law that was passed, then there has to be some sort of a change in how the DILG would circularize the planning options for local government units.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Villacorte. Okay, let's now proceed to the next question, and this is for you again, Justine. And this one is from Noel Palonco. He asks, does the study include how many LDCs or local development councils in the country which are genuinely organized and in operation according to the purposes mandated by the local government code? Genuinely organized means no political interventions were involved in the identification and recognition of the members of these LDCs. He adds, I am asking this question because there is a perception that majority of the members of the LDCs are handpicked by the incumbent governors, mayors, or even barangay captains in the barangay development councils. Justine?
Yes. Thank you for that question, Mr. Talonco. It's very interesting because our information on the local development council, we got it from the regular monitoring practice of the Bureau of Local Government of Supervision at DILG. They have what you call the Local Development Council Functionality Index. So our study itself did not look into that. We just lifted the results of the evaluation of the Bureau of Local Government Supervision. And it would be great if you could take a look at that as well. They develop it, they revise it every year, the criteria regarding that. So thank you.
Thank you, Justine. Okay, for our next question, and this one is from Novel Bangsal, and we would like to ask Mayor Fortes, aside from Justine, to give her thoughts. Okay, Novel Bangsal asked, municipalities have the least revenue capacity relative to provinces and cities, having very limited taxing powers. Hence, more than 70% of their income are from national government fiscal transfers. Also, more than 50% of their income are spent on PS alone or personal services. Given this context and the highly fragmented nature of our LGUs, will the Bandanas ruling further amplify the issue of vertical and horizontal fiscal imbalance and equitable spatial development? You may answer first, Justine, then we will ask Mayor Fortes to give her comments after you.
Okay, thank you, Sir Novel. I think he's with the CPBD, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yes.
thank you for listening in. That's a tough question, which I don't think I can answer because it really depends on what will happen once the Mandanas ruling is in effect. It depends also on who is sitting. Governance, apart from the institutions, the mandates and all that, it also depends on the personality, behavioral of whoever would be the local chief executive. So may or may not. I can't answer that with our current study, and I wouldn't want to dare do that. So thank you.
Okay. Mayor Fortes, would you like to give your thoughts as a local chief
Yes.
executive?
Yes, yes.
Go ahead, ma'am.
For sure, the Mandanas mana, because of the Mandanas ruling will be a boost first of the LGUs. 2022, it's going to good money to the certainly the 20% development fund of the LGUs is going to go up. So it will be a big boost. Like in my jurisdiction, and I'd like to tie this up to the earlier question on underutilization. In my jurisdiction, I am very sure that the antidote to underutilization of the local development fund is monitoring of the PPAs embodied in the AIP from beginning to end, meaning you go through the AIP from time to time, as the LCA should go through it from time to time, and monitor the early stages of the implementation of the PPA until they are done. So the Bandanas mana will be a big boost to the 20% coffers of the LGUs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Fortes. Okay, let us now go to the next question. And this is from a follow-up question from Mr. Noel Falonca. And this is for you again, Justine. Republic Act 8425 identifies 14 basic sectors as partners of the national and local governments in development. What can you advise for these sectors to be given the opportunity and authority to be involved actively in the local development councils?
Could you kindly repeat again? Sorry, Sheila. Yeah,
it's okay.
Republic Act 845.
Yes, this one is again a follow-up question from Mr. Noel Falonca, and he asked, okay, Republic Act 8425 identifies 14 basic sectors as partners of the national and local governments in development. So he's asking about your advice on how these sectors can be given more opportunity and authority to be involved actively in the local development councils.
Okay, so thank you for that, Mr. Talonco. Again, the follow-up question. I don't think I can answer it categorically, but when we did our interview, we also included in the planning team a representative from the CSO. And these would typically be coming from one of the priority sectors. So for all of our municipalities, there was always one representative. It depends on which kind of CSO. We had in the study the rank of the frequency of a certain sector that's represented in the development council. But with regards to how to get them into, I think that would be more of really within the political realm. Among, for example, in a locality, what is your priority? Fisheries, senior citizens, poor, women. So yeah, thank you very much.
Perhaps we can ask, we can also throw this question to Mayor Fortes. Given her experience in Sorsogon, in Barcelona, ma'am?
I must say that, there is no politics in doing that, because there is a clear-cut DILG prescribed requirements before a civil, an organization may be accredited and become part of the local development council. So there is a process. The Sangguniang Bayan has to accredit the organization, and there you go. There is a list prepared by the Sangguniang Bayan, and from there, mostly in the case of my municipality, practically part of these to a wider spectrum of sectoral representation.
It is very good to hear, ma'am. Okay,
Thank
for
you.
our next question, this is from Corinne Canlas of the World Bank. And her question pertains to the GIDA areas, or the geographically isolated and disadvantaged areas. And she said most GIDA areas are least populated and may not pass the standards of DOH for a rural health unit. But these are the areas most needing the RHUs. I work with WB, DSWD on Kalahisids, and I have seen this as a problem given remoteness of GIDA areas. So how can we adjust standards and make it variable based on certain criteria? Some thoughts from our speakers. Probably you can start, Justine, and we can also ask perhaps Mayor Fortes and even our friends from the DILG for the remarks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sheila, and thank you for the question, Ms. Canlas. And that's also a very important issue. When we were estimating the infrastructure gaps, of course, we recognize that it might not be feasible to have one RHU for this certain amount, or it might cross municipalities and all that. So these are uniquely defined. So what we were tasked to do really was just to give an overall picture of how much might be needed to continue the LGSF-A program. And what we got was 166 billion. But you're absolutely right. It has to be very uniquely defined. And sometimes it may not be feasible what the standard. So it would depend on the current conditions, contextualized, as Mayor Fortes said earlier. Thank you.
Any other remarks from our speakers? Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Go ahead, po.
If I may venture, one permanent solution to that is let's connect those GIDAs to the population areas of the localities. That way, they would no longer be classified or categorized as GIDA. They would no longer be isolated or disadvantaged. So physically, let's connect these GIDAs to the population areas of the locality. How? By building roads, bridges, connecting the GIDAs. I guess that's one practical and permanent solution to the problem of GIDAs. And the moment that we have connected them to the population areas, then that's the time that we can build maybe RHUs or health centers in those former GIDAs.
Thank you very much, Attorney Fortes. Okay, for our next question, and this is from Arnold Rowan Pita. Many LGUs have not been fully exercising their revenue-raising power, especially its proprietary and regulatory functions and local taxation, and have become very reliant on intergovernmental transfers, or the IRA. What is our guarantee that the LGUs will utilize their larger share to fund their mandates and not keep asking for more? Any of our speakers can, Paul, would you have some comments? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think in short, there is no guarantee that the LGUs will utilize the larger share for mandates and not just keep asking for more. The concerning thing about the Mandanas ruling, from my standpoint, watching these issues for a long time, looking at the politics of the era, is how it has the capacity just to pile more patronage resources onto the local government level. Now, that is not to say that all local executives would be using the funds for that purpose, but when you give out a great deal more money without any clear performance criteria, you are going to get some results that are good. People use local politicians using the money for good purpose, and other places in which it's just going to be used to enhance electoral position and not necessarily for development outcomes. So I think it is concerning to have such a large impost on the national budget without having clear performance criteria. So in short, I don't think there's any guarantee at all.
Thank you very much, Paul. Okay, for our next question, perhaps we can ask the remarks of our friends from the DILG on this. It's a bit controversial to say the least. Okay, and this one is from Cornelio Guantero. And he said 2 of the recommendations in the first presentation pointed out the need to exact compliance or strict enforcement related to that. Paul pointed out the paradox of decentralization of it requiring a strong center to ensure that what has been agreed at the top is implemented at the bottom. Why can the DILG not assume the role of the strong center in the exercise of its power of general supervision by ensuring that the provision of the LGC Local Government Code of 1991, especially with respect to the CLUP and CDP formulation as well as investment programming and budgeting, are observed by the LGUs? I have not heard in any news that a local chief executive or LGU official has been suspended for failure to come up with a CDP or CLUP. Any thoughts from our speakers or discussants?
Okay. DILG issued a memorandum circular last year, no? And going by the implementation of the local government units, we set a deadline that by June 30 of this year, 2020, LGUs without comprehensive development plans will already be flagged. When I say flagged, then that's the whole process of bringing to their attention their administrative non-compliance to the local government code provision. Sadly, dumating itong ating pandemya. So in short, because of that, we are extending the deadline from June 30 of this year to September 15 of this year. So after September 15, all cities and municipalities without a comprehensive development plan will already be flagged, meaning we will already bring to their attention, and then after flagging, then it comes the show cause order, and after the show cause order, then there goes the administrative remedies that is available to the state. But we are moving towards that direction now. Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Mr. Villacorte, for your clarification. Actually, what you have just said is a response also to the question of Ms. Precious Joy B. Moises. Sabi niya, Ms. Sicat has shown on her data that on 2015, only half of the LGUs has formulated their CDPs. I would like to know, how does the DILG takes action on the remaining half that were not able to apply or to comply, since non-compliance is still happening at the moment? So nasagot na po yan ni Sir Richard. Okay. Okay, Justine, this next question is again for you. Are there any findings or recommendations as to the gaps on the processes and framework on local development planning? Well, this Ms. Justine has shown the results on the study on the gaps in terms of local development planning. So nasagot naman ito ni Ms. Justine sa kanyang presentation. Okay. This question is from Johnny Mandokdok. What is the update of the CBMS Act? What government agency is in charge of providing technical assistance like modular training in implementing the CBMS to the LGUs? Mr. Villacorte, would you like to answer this? Hello, sir.
I would like to defer the to either to Assistant Director June Marali or to
Okay.
Dr. Celia Reyes because she would know better
Okay. Yes, yes.
regarding CBMS.
AD Marali, could we get your response on this, please? And then we will go to Dr. Reyes.
Yeah, good afternoon. Right now, the Philippine Statistical Authority is in the forefront already of the CBMS. However, the DILG is still part of, is still in the process of doing transitioning. So there are capacity development intervention or coaching sessions that are being done by the DILG until such time that the whole structure will be set up under PSA. So we're in the process of transitioning the CBMS from the DILG to PSA.
Thank you very much, Assistant Director Marali. Ma'am Sel, would you like to comment on the CBMS Act?
Yeah, as mentioned by Assistant Director Marali, we're in the transition phase now. So the ILG is is taking the lead in terms of providing capacity building now to local government units with the assistance of the CBMS network. And I think the ILG would still continue to be part of the capacity building, particularly on the planning, on the utilization of the data. But for the data collection part, I think PSRTI and PSA would be taking the lead after the whole system has been transferred to PSA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Sel. Okay, our next question is for Mayor Fortes, ma'am. And this one is from Thea Maris Perez. Ma'am, she wants to ask your opinion on why a large percentage of LGUs lack planning and thus were underspending. Maybe get your thoughts on this as a local chief executive. Hi, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
Yes, I mentioned earlier about underspending, and I put forward the case of my LGU. I said that the basic as an antidote to underspending, the LCE has to do a lot of monitoring, periodic, regular monitoring of the PPAs embodied in the AIP. Actually, it's a technique that might work effective for other LGUs. In my case, I must say, modesty aside, that I am unlucky enough. I have data here from 2013. It wasn't me yet. The LCE was someone else. From 2013 down until 2019. It has always been 96%, 96%, 98%. So I guess you should believe what I am saying, Ma'am Perez, that the technique is monitoring of the PPAs from start to finish. Thank you.
Very well said, ma'am. Okay, our next question is from Executive Director Merwin Salazar of the Senate Economic Planning Office. And he said, Dr. Sicat and Dr. Hutchcroft clearly discussed the factors affecting the level of locally sourced revenues. What is your take on the idea that we completely take away from LGUs designing and passing local legislation on LSRs? Instead, bring them back to the central government in terms of designing and passing tax legislation and make LGUs just collectors of taxes. In other words, all taxes will be national taxes. Then ERA can be designed to be performance-based, hinged on LGU tax collection performance and spending performance, that is absorptive capacity as one of the indicators. After all, most LGUs do not want to impose or collect local taxes due to, among others, patronage politics. Mayor Fortes, would you have any thoughts on this?
I
Tough
don't fully
question.
concur. I don't fully concur on the matter about politics there, because if the LCE has the political will, then any revenue raising initiative would fall into place. And changing or amending the system now on revenue collection would entail amendment of the law. So it's going to be it's not in the court of the LGUs. It's going to be in Congress.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Mayor Fortes. We have some questions here from our Facebook viewers, and this one is from Jose Marie Trinidad, and he asks, how can lower level LGUs apply the bottom-up planning approach if different levels of LGUs somehow have a disconnect in terms of goals and objectives? Any thoughts from ma'am?
That it boils down to development planning, because it's gonna start from the bottom, as maybe that's his notion, and it's gonna be the local development council which will assist the LCE to identify the PPAs that they would want to embody in the AIP.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your response. Okay, we have, okay, hold on, as I am reviewing the questions, just in case we missed, okay. Justine, this is for you. And this is from Corinne Canlas, and she's asking if the study looked into the income class of municipalities and the way they allocate their resources. Justine?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that question, Ms. Canlas. Again, I'm assuming she's from the one from the World Bank. In any case, we did not look at how municipalities allocated their resources by income class, because what we looked at actually was we were able to classify the fiscal gaps by income class. So that's what we focused on, because we were focusing on income, on fiscal gaps. We did not look at the expenditures. But another discussion paper of mine, 2 years ago, I think, 2018, I think tackled the distribution of expenditures by income class. So thank you.
Okay. And this one is from Celia Flor, again for you, Justine. Gender analysis tool used for their planning. Did you look into this, whether they use some tool which is related to analyzing gender equality? Have you seen this in your study?
No, we did not get to look at that, unfortunately. We just looked at what their planning processes were, and we asked them questions. So I'm not sure if it came out, but no, we did not ask about this. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And Mark Gamboa, no, we haven't asked the question of Mark Gamboa. And this is actually our last question. Okay, quite lengthy. Mark Gamboa from the faculty member of UP Diliman School of Urban and Regional Planning. First, okay, he has several questions. What are your recommendations to address the challenge of harmonizing all the other sectoral and thematic plans? The ILG's count was at 33, while our count was at around 45 to 50 plans that are being required from the LGUs with the CDP. Okay, what was the linkage between CDP, LDIP, AIP, and the various sectoral? Was there a linkage between these different plans? Likewise, was the CDP linked to the CLUP? Mm-hmm. And the CLUP, okay, where am I? The CLUP process follows a different set of guidelines from DHSUD. This forms part of the entire local development planning framework. Perhaps you can answer this part of these questions first before we go to the rest. Ms. Mayor Fortes, would you have any thoughts on these
Yes,
questions?
they are. Yes, basic is the AIP, and they are vertically connected.
Connected.
Yeah, they are vertically connected. So they are related to one another.
Yes. Okay. Justine, would you have any thoughts before we go to the rest of the questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Gamboa, for that. And also for highlighting the 33 to 45 plans that are required. Perhaps someone from the DILG can mention that. We did not ask this in the survey, but the feedback we got is that these thematics should actually be part of the CDP. And Mayor Fortes is correct that they are vertically linked, but we did not look at it in particular. We did not look at each and every 1,373 plans and see if it was linked with CLUP. If that is what, I think that is what Mr. Gamboa is.
Gamboa.
So we were not able to look at that. And yes, in fact, that's in the entire local development planning process. But as also a limitation of our study is that we focused only on the comprehensive development planning process. As I mentioned also in my earlier presentation. So that is what we asked lengthily about in our survey. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, follow up. Mr. Villacarte, please.
Yes, I'd like to throw in a few points regarding the long question. For one, DILG, we are talking to PIDS and at the same time we're talking to UPSURP. Okay, so what we are talking to UPSURP is the notion that local development planning should already be area-based, meaning it should already be in the areas where the plans are needed. And one of the things that we are doing right now is to capacitate LRIs or local research institutions for them to become local development planners, so that local government units like mayors or governors can just go to their state universities and colleges around and ask them to help them in local development planning. So in short, we're doing parallel moves. Like Dr. Sicat here is trying to scrutinize the CDP process, because the purpose of this study is we wanted to show proof to the national government, especially to the Department of Budget and Management, that indeed local government units represented here by Mayor Cynthia still needs money from the center. Okay, because in 2017, there was a question of whether we should continue giving funds to the local government units. And when this study was formulated way back in 2017, the Mandanas ruling was still not decided upon by the Supreme Court. So we needed to make some evidence that local government units all over the country still needs assistance financially from the national government. That's why it boiled down na ito yung tema ng study ni Dr. Sicat. So I think, and then I would like to correct myself. We have also just recently adjusted the deadline from September 15, 2020, because of the pandemic and because of the new normal. The Secretary has again issued memorandum circular adjusting the deadline to May 30, 2021. But this time, we are no longer just looking for CDP. We are looking for CDP and CLUP together in May 30, 2021. And then after that, the wheels of the DILG administrative oversight powers will be exercised. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Villacorde. Those are very important information that our LGU should take note of. Okay, next part, last part of the question of, okay. Mr. Gamboa, okay. Following the prescribed process appears easy for LGUs. Ensuring that they have valid plans in terms of the planning period covered is also easy. But ensuring that the content is of substance is another matter. Having said that, what do you think is the most appropriate governance scale to make local development planning and budgeting? Okay, make local development planning and budgeting more efficient and effective. Dr. Sicat or Mayor Fortes?
Yes, ma'am. There are guidelines that we follow. Like when it comes to budgeting, there is this manual for budgeting. So this is not hello.
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you po.
Yes. So we adhere to prescribed guidelines when we do development planning. This is not a fragmented effort on the part of the LGU. There are guideposts that we obey.
Thank you very much, Mayor Fortes. And if we could throw this very last question for you, may humabol po kasi. What is your take on the possibility of requiring LGUs to exercise its corporate powers and provide them with strict revenue targets coming from government-owned enterprises to supplement local budget?
That would be a welcome development, but again, there should be contextualization. Like my LGU cannot compare with what the city of Manila or Quezon City. So it has to be realistic. It has to be realistic in setting the target for all LGUs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Fortes. Well, friends, what a lively and engaging discussion we just had. And well, we hope that the presentations and the insights shared by our speakers contributed to a better understanding of the planning and budgeting issues confronting our local municipal governments. Well, some important takeaways that we can glean from the discussion are the need to strengthen the capacities of our LGUs, not just in planning and budgeting, but also in monitoring and evaluation of projects. Better oversight by the concerned agencies in ensuring that our LGUs are regularly updating their development plans. More integrated management information systems for real-time monitoring of project implementation, and better harmonization of programs, projects, and activities across different levels of LGUs. Let us thank our resource speaker, Dr. Justine Sicat, our discussants, Mayor Fortes, and Professor Hutchcroft, and our friends from the DILG, Assistant Director Alfonso Marali, and SGLP Program Manager, Mr. Richard Villacorte, for their very insightful remarks and comments. Let us give them a big virtual clap. And thank you to all of you for your active participation. Okay, maraming salamat po. Okay, I now call on BLG, the Assistant Director, Alfonso Marali, for his closing remarks. AD Marali?
Okay, good afternoon. Magandang hapon sa lahat. At the onset, allow me on behalf of the department to thank everyone for joining us in this three-part series, PIDS-DILG webinar series on promoting good local governance in the Philippines. Your invaluable insights and active participation have made this webinar successful. This partnership with PIDS commenced because of our desire to learn where the municipal governments are in terms of key infrastructure and identify existing gaps in the matter of governance, policy, project execution, and fiscal concerns at the local level. We thought that this endeavor might be the first step in establishing a baseline of data of key municipal infrastructure projects and governance practices, especially in the areas of budgeting and development planning. Now, we see the products of our efforts are highly relevant to the ongoing policymaking efforts that will shape our nation's long-term countryside development, as well as to further decentralization of the responsibility and resource structure. The DILG strongly supports the findings and key recommendations of the study, as we have discussed this afternoon. We have endeavored to integrate its concern in our own activities and strategic planning, from crafting plans for local development and supervision to preparing continuous issuance assistance to our local governments. This is especially timely as we are developing a transition plan to cope with the planned devolution of basic services to local governments come 2020. Please do share the information and knowledge obtained in this webinar in your own respective networks and offices. We hope that the report will reach not only government agencies, but also groups such as non-government organizations, private sector, the academe, and the others. By increasing the number of people who have access to the report and utilize its findings, we are helping to push for greater transparency, accountability, and sense of responsibility from all levels of government. Allow me at this point to conclude this session by extending our sincerest words of gratitude to the entire PIDS family for a successful partnership and implementation of this project. To Dr. Justine Diokno-Sicat for always making herself available to discuss the contents of the project. To all the municipal LGUs that provided the insights and actively participated in the course of the study. And to all the DILG regional and field offices that ensured the smooth coordination and facilitation all throughout the project implementation. To the DILG bureaus and offices that provided the inputs and assistance, and of course to the hosts and organizers of this activity. To the speakers and panelists, and to everyone who has made this activity possible. I hope that you have enjoyed this webinar session and wish to invite everyone to the subsequent activities on July 30 and August 13. Muli, maraming salamat on behalf of the department at magandang hapon sa ating.
Thank you very much, Assistant Director Marali of the BLGD. Before we finally close, we have a few reminders. First, you can access the presentation of Dr. Sicat from the PIDS website. Flash on the screen is the link, but don't worry, we will also email you the link. Please also answer the feedback survey that will pop on your screen after the webinar. We will also email you the link after the event. Your comments are very important to us to improve our webinars, and please regularly visit our website, of course, also the website of the DILG, and please also follow us on our social media pages. And finally, we would like to acknowledge the various organizations from government, academia, civil society, business, and international development community who joined us today, and you can see the names of these offices on the screen. And of course, our deepest acknowledgements to the DILG for partnering with us in this webinar. Again, our acknowledgements to the BLGD headed by Director Ana Bonagua and the SLGP program headed by Mr. Richard Villacorde for their all-out support in organizing this webinar with us, as well as in disseminating information about our webinar series. As mentioned by AD Marali, we have 2 more webinars after this, one on July 30 and another on August 13. Next week on July 23, we will talk about another interesting topic, which is a PIDS study conducted by our President, Dr. Celia Reyes, on the government programs for senior citizens. We hope you could join us again. See you again next week. Stay safe and stay healthy. Maraming salamat po.
RID. Thank you to
Thank you
Professor
very
Hutchcroft.
much. Thank you very much, Professor Hutchcroft, Mayor Fortes.
Thanks to all of the
Salamat.
Thank you.
Maraming
LG.
salamat. Thanks for inviting me to this forum session. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you very much, AD Barali and Mr. Villacorte. Marami pong salamat.
Bye.
Tapos na ba? Tapos na ba?
Hello, Gwen. Are you here?
Yes, Ma'am Justine.
Hi. Thank you so much again, ha? Teka,
Apa,
question ako. Kasi there are comments here in the chat. Can we save the text of the chat? Or paano ba to?
Ganun ba? Mag-join ulit tayo?
sorry, Ma'am Justine. Hindi ko po
Oo, there
na-copy
are-
yung sinasabi niya.
I'm sorry. There are in the chat box, there are comments na I was not able to read. Will we be able to save the text of the chat as a document?
Yes po. I can actually save it and send it to you.
I kindly please do so. Thank you so much.
Po. Ma'am Justine,
yes.
nandito na po tayo. Can I ask your permission to upload your PowerPoint on the PIDS website?
Sige, will you delete my hidden files? I mean, how would you upload it as a...
Let's just discuss via email na lang po.
Sige, okay. Sige, thanks.
Bye, Justine.
Bye, thank you so much, Sheila. Salamat sa inyo lahat, Miss Wing.
Bye. Salamat, ma'am. Congrats.
Oh, thanks. Yung text ng content.
I'll send it to you po.
Thanks. Bye.